Good evening, buddy. Happy Tuesday. Sorry to interrupt you before bed. Before you settle down, I'd love to tell you about the Listerine 21-Day Challenge. To learn more, just say Open Listerine 21-Day Challenge to your smart speaker now. All you've got to do is swish Listerine twice a day for 21 days. And you, yes you my friend, can reduce plaque bacteria for effective gum protection after 14 days. So before you head for bed, swish Listerine. That's what I call a fresh start to 2022.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept Show. I'm your host Paul Rook and we are exclusive to the PA UK radio network. Tonight we are joined as always by our regular troublesome duo.
Troublesome?
Richard Clements and Kerry Greenaway.
What's he on about, Kerry?
I'm a little offended by that, to be fair.
Right, yeah.
I mean, I hate to be like, a snowflake and all that, but I'm not offended by that comment, Richard.
Oh, well. We've been called worse, I'm sure.
Yeah, this is true. This is true.
Not by me. Not by me.
If he's picking on us, he's leaving somebody else alone.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
Yeah.
Mm.
So what you guys been up to then this week?
Me, my bike is finally on the road, my push bike. And I've been out a couple of times. I was out yesterday on it and I got halfway around my cycle route, which I thought I'd take, but I came to a hill. And after a year of inactivity, I ended up walking home pushing the bike, literally. I gave it is a push bike, so I got off and pushed it. Yeah, but no, my sort of fitness routine now is sort of coming in. The weather's getting better, the nights are drawn right out, so hopefully I'll be able to shed a few of these lockdown pounds, which I'm sure everyone out there can sympathise with.
Well, I certainly can.
So what gym have you joined then, Kerry, this week?
I have joined the Gym of Life.
Okay.
So I've gone from 0 miles per hour to 100 miles per hour in my day-to-day life, and that's exhausting. I don't know how I did it.
Yeah.
I think you'll find anymore. I think you'll find just being on your feet and walking around the shop, I mean, that will sort of burn the pounds. You'll be all right, dear.
Well, I hope so, because I'm a right tubby little monkey at the moment. Tubby monkey. Now, that wasn't what was going on in my head, as you can imagine. Something else was going on there. But no, yeah, I hope so, because I don't want to be this size. It's like the biggest I've ever been, I think. Certainly enjoyed my lockdown. But no, you're right. I think it's just a question of this transitional phase is incredibly weird. Is all I can say, because like I say, you go from 0 miles per hour to like 100 miles per hour again, and your 100 miles per hour is your normal life, right? Yeah. Going to work, coming home. All right, so we haven't got the socialising bit on top yet. I don't know. I've got the energy for socialising at the moment. That's all I can say. It's exhausting.
No, you just take it easy. You stay in, cuddle up, and watch your films.
Slow steps forward into life. I like this slow step forward back into it. It's exhausting as it is, but it's good. It's nice seeing other people, and I'm getting more. Like, we talked about before, like your brain almost slows down too.
Yeah.
And now
I totally agree.
It's starting to kick back in. I feel more motivated.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, you are time constrained now because I've got work and other things going on. So my days are filled more. So you have got to time manage more, which is great. I love it. I like my life. I liked lockdown because, get to sleep when you want, eat when you want, right? But no pressure in a funny kind of way. You're allowed to stay at home and just relax. But I've said that all along. It doesn't suit me. I like to earn my money. I like to live. I like people, funny enough. I know it sometimes doesn't seem like I do, but I do like people. And, I'm a people person. So yeah, it's good. It's really been good to see some of my regular customers and stuff like that. It's been brilliant. So yeah, so that's what I've been up to last week. Bought lots more crystals, Spirit and Soul Island crystals, everybody.
Oh yes,
Cheeky
go over and
wink.
check them out. Yes, oh,
Cheeky
do.
wink.
Really good quality ones as well. I have to.
They are amazing quality. Even some of the
Yeah.
quality that's coming through, I'm shocked at.
I've got my 3 skulls on my computer all staring at me, sort of giving me these good vibes. So yeah, no, they're good.
And I
like
have to
my
say,
crystal
they're
skulls.
very good competitive prices.
Thank you very much. I do pride
Well, there you
myself
go.
on getting the best quality crystals for the best price, everybody. Spirit and Soul Island crystals.
That's
Anyway.
okay. We'll bill you for the advert later.
Yeah, thanks very much,
brilliant.
guys. Yeah, cheers.
It's not cheap.
Anyway.
Yeah. So what are we discussing tonight? What are we going to delve into tonight?
Well, we were talking, as everybody knows, we chat quite a lot off air, and because we're all really good friends. And one area that our lovely Richard is particularly good at, shall we say?
Yeah.
He likes this area.
Yeah, and he's even bought waders for the
Yes,
trenches.
yes. Well, you could call them for the trenches, but yet to be tried out. Yeah, carry on, Gary.
Yeah, it's the wars, the world wars, and
World Wars,
you know, particularly the Civil War, but also World War One and World War Two. So anyway, one night on Skype we got talking, and we started talking about some of the phenomena that occurred in the wars. So we separated it down into 2 shows. We're doing World War One this week, and then next week we're going to do World War Two. But the first one is World War One. Now, first of all, I think what we've always said this: whenever you look at a period of history, you have to look at the time frame, look at the political, the cultural influences. We have to look at all areas to get a vibe of what it was like. Now, I don't think this is one area that any of us can imagine, even the hardships of World War One.
Oh yes, I would totally agree with you there, Kerry. It was sort of, and especially, and as you said, the time frame when it occurred. I mean, Europe was sort of, just sort of was in sort of turmoil. I mean, they'd been at peace basically for about 30 years, and then suddenly this conflict erupted. And when it did erupt, it literally did erupt overnight. Within about a month, I mean, all the warring belligerents were actually hard at it, which is actually quite something.
Now, also, I think the scale of this is something that was unprecedented, the scale of the men involved. Now, before, when wars occurred and, battles occurred, relatively, I mean, we're talking hundreds of people involved in like a civil war battle or something like that. But nothing was on the level of this World War One. The amount of men that were thrown at this was just phenomenal, wasn't it? It's millions. We're talking millions.
We are talking millions, yes. I mean, the German army, and at the start of the war, could field up to 1.5 million men. And that was even before the war started. So that just gives you some idea. The French would have been the same. I mean, the only sort of country that had a smaller army was the UK. I mean, because our army we tended to rely a lot more on a volunteer army as opposed to a conscripted army, which they had been doing on the continent for years.
Now, the other side to this is our technological abilities, we'll go with,
Yes.
were very limited back then as well. Now, I think we've all seen Warhorse.
Yes.
What?
No.
Paul's seen a film that I have. Paul hasn't seen a film that I have. God, and this must be a first.
I was going to say, I'm a little shocked by this. This is a film. My God, we've actually found a film Paul hasn't seen.
You could probably find quite a lot of war films that I haven't seen.
Oh.
Yeah, you're not a war film man. That's something I've noticed, yes. Right.
Yeah,
I'm actually shocked and stunned we found a film that Paul hasn't watched, quite frankly.
If it's not space and time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can see that.
Okay, well, anyway.
I bet you're in floods of tears watching that, weren't you, Kerry?
Oh, I can't watch it. I've watched it once. That was enough. Oh, if you want a good cathartic cry, watch Warhorse. Right. Oh, my God. Floods. Anyway. That kind of gives you... They relied so much on horsepower for transportation of goods, food, munitions, all sorts of things. You've got to remember the car was in very early stages, wasn't it?
Yes, I mean, they did have some mechanised sort of transport, but certainly at the start of the war, I mean, it was, the armies on the march would have looked no different to what they would have done 100 years previously during the Napoleonic era. You would have had foot soldiers and cavalry and horse to sort of pull your cannons and artillery pieces and everything. Yeah, I mean that.
So I'm setting the scene effectively, because one of the things that I think everybody remembers about World War One is the trench warfare.
Yes.
Now, you've got to remember, as we've said, horses, early mechanisms like cars and stuff.
Yeah.
Men marching. It churns up the road. It turns it into a quagmire of mud, basically.
Yeah.
When they dug the trenches, they had planks, but that didn't do a lot. And when you have rain and dugouts, you get mud. A lot of mud. Right? This is hardship on a level we can't even understand. The limits you're pushed to physically, mentally, psychologically, you just can't even comprehend the conditions that the men went through on this.
No, I mean, it is quite something. I mean, I've actually sort of like experienced only very sort of briefly. For the listeners out there, I used to do battle reenactment, which involved sort of going away for weekends, pitching our tents and living like they did sort of back in the day. And if it rained for the whole weekend, which it used to, it could be really miserable. And we only had 2 nights out in it. And these soldiers would have had, sort of like, well, particularly the winter months, would have had 4 to 5 months of it.
Mm-hmm. Amongst all this, you're under a constant barrage of fire from both sides, so the noise level is horrendous. Constant bangs and crashes, bad enough. Have firework night, right?
Yeah, true.
Bad enough one evening. But you are living under these conditions. It's just horrific what men went through. And it's men. Forget women at this stage. Women didn't go to war. This is men. Boys.
Yeah.
What was the youngest person that served in World War One, Richard? Can you remember?
Oh, well, officially you had to be 16 and over, but no, I think 18 and over to actually enlist. But I think the youngest was 14 years old. He managed to pass. He must have been quite a mature 14-year-old, but the youngest in the British Army was recorded at being 14.
You're talking young men. You're not talking experienced men, you're talking young men. Mm-hmm. Now, these horrific conditions, I feel, are partly to explain some of the phenomena that happened, because there were some strange occurrences and accounts that came out of World War One. I nearly said World War Two then. World War One. So, I think you have to take this into account. Now, it's a very, very famous account of the Angel of the Mon. Now, this is something that Richard knows quite well.
Yeah.
So, Richard, do you want to give us a rundown of what the account was?
Yeah, the Angels of Mon incident, I mean, it happened in the real early stages of the war. I mean, the world went to war in early August, but by late August, I mean, the German army was on the march. It was coming into France, and it was actually coming into Belgium. Now, Belgium was neutral, and the Germans should not have done it, but the Germans actually asked the Belgians for safe passage through so they could get into France, because they wanted to outflank the whole French army and surround Paris and technically end the war there and then, because this war wasn't expected to drag on for as long as what it actually did. So as the Germans were advancing through Belgium, this actually brought Britain into the war, because Britain had vowed to protect Belgium neutrality. So they sent an army over into France to halt the German advance. So you've got the scene set. So the French actually put them right in the middle of their lines to actually hold the German advance through Belgium. But the British army at the time was only something like 800,000, and they were up against a force of well over 1 million men. So that sort of just gives you the sort of overview of what it was actually like. And the first actual conflict the British met the Germans was actually at the town of Mons in northern Belgium. And as you were saying, Kerry, the war at this point was not mud and sort of trenches. It was open warfare. They were it was late summer. It was sort of the sun, the land was dry, but it was open warfare as opposed to trench warfare. So the British actually set up along the canal and actually met the advancing German army. And they engaged, and basically they were sort of two lines opposite each other, just firing away at each other. But then the Germans actually managed to get further down the canal and actually outflank the English army, which caused a lot of panic in the British army, and they actually had to retreat, and otherwise they would have been surrounded and, well, effectively wiped out. So the Battle of Mons is more of the retreat that actually happened afterwards, and the British were fighting a constant rearguard action to get back to pre-prepared positions just outside of Paris. And it was against this backdrop that sort of stories started to sort of circulate that there was some sort of divine intervention, because on paper the British army should have capitulated and been destroyed, but it wasn't. They managed to hold the German army back enough for them to retreat in good order. And they got back to their pre-prepared positions and actually managed to sort of, along with their French allies, to actually save Paris from being totally surrounded. So it was after this. A lot of people think the Angels of Mons was actually reported actually during the battle, but it wasn't. It was sort of not long after. There was sort of these anecdotal stories going about to explain how the British actually done this, that they had some sort of divine intervention. And this is where you sort of hear stories of the Angels of Mons. And it's an interesting one, because some said they could actually see St. George on his white horse with his fiery swords. Others claimed to sort of see sort of angels, and others sort of claimed to see sort of medieval style bowmen. All these reports that are reported to have come from the front actually didn't. It was sort of it was a story written actually for a newspaper, I believe. What was it? The London Post, Kerry?
The London Evening News.
Yeah, and there was an author. Can't think of his name off the top of my head.
Arthur Machen.
Oh yeah, and Arthur Machen, and he wrote a short story for the London Evening News, and explaining a ghostly occurrence using the Battle of Mons, and sort of putting this ghostly occurrence as an overlay on the actual battle. And it was from that they really sort of that's where the sort of story started to sort of come alive. And a lot of sort of people back home sort of took a lot of good stead from that, sort of thinking, although we did technically lose the battle, the war is there to be won. You know, it was sort of more of a morale boost for the English nation to say, well, you know, we did lose the battle, but God is on our side and we will prevail.
And, you know, moral or morale is incredibly important, isn't it?
Oh, yes. And it's not just the morale of the men in the field, it's the morale of the population back home. I mean, you've got the politicians are actually juggling in this, and particularly sort of during wars and stuff, it is not that uncommon to get stories like sort of the Angels of Mons, and the MPs and stuff will ignore it and let it fester, sort of thing. Will let it gain momentum, because they know it does sort of give the troops in the field and the public at home good morale and something to sort of cling on to.
Mm-hmm. I think the thing is, I think what you have to also understand is public opinion about going to war is incredibly important politically. You have to have the people behind you, you know, to support the war. We've seen what happens when people don't support a war. They get turned on very nastily in political circles. So you have to have this political support, you know, this public support. So these stories are all designed to keep that support for what you're doing. You're sending your men effectively to another country. You know, right? We cross the channel. It's not like it's just it's not an initial threat to our borders because we are surrounded by water. Do you know what I mean? Not like Belgium, they're surrounded three sides by other countries, aren't they?
Yes, Holland, Germany, France, yeah.
Yeah. So you've always got that worry on your borders, whereas we kind of don't really, because we've got water, surrounded by water, and we are a naval nation.
Yeah, I mean, and whenever sort of Britain went to war, say we haven't been invaded since 1066, so we have always fought our wars somewhere else on the continent, you know, and even going back to Napoleonic times. I mean, we weren't threatened here in England, but we fought our campaigns in Portugal, France, Belgium again. I mean, Belgium is actually quite key to this because it's a small country, but it does sort of, and its claim to fame is it's like a military crossroads, and throughout history a lot of major battles have happened in Belgium, you know, sort of one sort of belligerent defending whilst the other sort of trying to attack. I mean, Belgium's a place you always seem to have to pass through to get somewhere else. And, you know, and you just have to look back in history. I mean, Waterloo is in Belgium again, you know, that's a big battle, and a couple of other battles of the Napoleonic Wars. And in northern France as well, you sort of got the sort of like the 100 Wars battlefields like Agincourt and Crécy. So there's a huge sort of there's a huge sort of mythos of that area. It's sort of steeped in tradition and sort of folklore.
So it's in the backdrop of all of this that you've got this writer, Arthur Machen, who is sitting there, and the backstory to that is he was sitting in a restaurant and he was looking at a plate, believe it or not. There was, you know, a plate in a London restaurant, and on the plate it had a figure of St. George with the motto, Adsit Anglis Sanctus Georgius. May St. George be a present help to the English. And it felt very relevant at that time with this news of the British, you know, on retreat, having been defeated in this horrendous battle that has gone on. And he said that, you know, it was just so telling at that moment. And then he says, I looked out of his window one Sunday morning and saw some newspaper bills from the little shop over the way, and then he wrote this account of this alleged encounter of angels helping the British. Like, so we are righteous in what we're doing. God is on our side. Like exactly what you said. God is on our side. Don't give up on us, basically. We're over here fighting a war. But all right, we're in retreat. But you're right. The battle may have been lost, but the war certainly hasn't. And it was in the very early days of the war.
Oh, yes, as I say, it was in the sort of like when it was open warfare, you know, they hadn't even started to dig trenches. I mean, it's nothing like you imagine the war to World War One is. I mean, the trenches were, well, towards the end of the year. It was mainly after the Battle of Mons, and the British and French armies sort of got back to sort of just from the outskirts of Paris, and that's when they dug in and, you know, started to sort of dig trenches and stuff. And the Germans, you know, they were pushed right to the ends of their supply lines, so they couldn't really go any further. So they dug in as well. So you essentially got a stalemate.
And that's what made the trench warfare so horrendous, because it becomes a stalemate. It becomes a push, retreat, push, retreat, push, retreat. On both sides, this is. Not just one side, this is both sides doing this. Anyway, now, there are questions on the story, because, so you've got, he says St. George, some people said it was St. Michael brandishing his sword as well. Then you've got a whole row of shining beings, all sorts of stories then come off the back of this. Now, I think that's an overlay. It appeared in several different places and reported by junior officers, apparently, about what they saw. But I think you also have to look at, you've got a company of very green men, army men, you know what I mean? They're young men, they're pushed to their limits. The first time they've ever encountered this kind of warfare. The pressures of that scenario, you can't underestimate. How many days without sleep, limited rations, you know, doesn't matter. Okay, the weather might have been clement, but it doesn't change the fact of the pressure that these people are under, and they're having to retreat. Now that's a blow to your motivation and your ego, and all sorts of other plays coming into play there.
Traditionally, in military circles, retreats are quite chaotic, because generals and the people that have planned sort of military sort of actions, they don't really plan on retreating. They always build their actions around winning. But, and when it does go against you, the retreats can be quite a sort of a rushed sort of a melee affair.
And remember, they'd had significant losses. They'd lost 7,812 men of all ranks, killed or wounded, and or missing, just missing, out of 40,000 men who took part in that battle. So that's quite a substantial loss. You're going to have known somebody somewhere in there that you knew, or was, you know, marched beside or something, you know what I mean, that suffered a loss. And on this, the psychological impact of this, you can understand why maybe if they did experience something supernatural, it could well have been hallucination, even if they had. But we don't think it did happen. We think it's come out of this story.
Yes, it's you know, the anecdotal sort of, you know, sort of like reports from the field are just that, sort of anecdotes. And you know, and I'm on the sort of, if something like this did happen, and, you know, sort of to the extent they said, it would have been reported. I mean, battles, despite the hectic nature of battles and stuff, they are very well documented. Because they have to be for sort of like future reference and stuff like that, and they are very well documented. And something, an incident like this would not have gone undocumented in military dispatches, and it is conspicuous by its absence.
Now, there are loads of, like Richard said, anecdotal tales. One of the men allegedly, I'm going to say allegedly because there's no report on this one. It's a friend of somebody's friend that's reported this. So it's anecdotal. Said that whilst they were retreating, something scared the Germans. The horses turned around and stampeded back onto the Germans. Good for the British, but not so good for the Germans on that one. But again, nothing in the dispatches about that. That's just an anecdotal tale. In 1915, Phyllis Campbell contributed an article to the Occult Review entitled The Angelic Leaders. She said everybody had seen them. However, a private, Frank Richards, said, and I'm going to quote, "If any angels were seen on the retirements, they were seen that night. March for hour after hour without a halt. We were now breaking it into 5th day of continuous marching with practically no sleep in between. But there was nothing there. But very nearly everyone was seeing things. We were all dead beat."
Yeah, I mean that is sort of, again, sort of like this sort of like Phyllis was at Campbell and the Occult Review. She's just sort of, I think that's a bit of wishful thinking on her part, to be quite honest.
Mm-hmm. Now, it becomes a bit of an interesting one because in amongst all of this, we have got a gentleman by the name of Brigadier General, can't speak.
General?
That's the word. Brigadier General John Charteris.
Right.
Now, remember this name, guys, because this is quite integral. He is the Chief Intelligence Officer at GHQ. And his kind of job, he's very covert, but his job is to spread morale-boosting propaganda and disinformation. He takes this tale, he runs with this tale. This is gold dust to him, right? Mm-hmm. Now, bearing in mind, you have got to understand that the only other way to obtain news was from letters from the soldiers themselves, from designated journalists that are there at the time, or from military notices that are put out.
Yeah, dispatches, yes.
That's it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, letters from the soldiers are heavily redacted at this time. They're read, and they're anything that could, be used against us, as it were, was taken out. So you've got a very streamlined media filtering, shall we say, going on. And in the backdrop of this, you've got ways of... Now, bearing in mind, it's not just the British who are going to read these. These are going to be read by other people as well. Enemies, effectively. So we kind of want to, as British people, we're going to put the best stories out, and we want to sort of make the Germans look awful, right?
Yeah.
Because that's going to deteriorate their morale. And also, it's a way of keeping support for the war.
Yeah.
So John Charteris is very clever at using information, rumour, propaganda, all these kind of things to manipulate opinions and morale.
I mean, yes, he certainly knows where to drop it in. I mean, he's a very clever man and, fascinating. It's fascinating sort of how he sort of manipulated everything. It must have been a fascinating job he had.
Well, an incredibly responsible job as well, because what you're putting out there is it could influence the way the war's going to go. Now, obviously, there's a huge appetite for information. People want to know what's going on in the public. They want to know how their men are doing, particularly if you've got invested interest of your husband or your son or your father or, somebody over there. You want to know. So there is a huge appetite for information. Rumours spread like wildfire. So it's a way of utilising that to our benefit.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't do it without loss of credibility. So you've got to be very careful on how you play this. And this particular story was very useful to John Charteris. He was like, yeah, we've got good on our side. We'll use that one.
Yeah, I mean, it even went as far that sort of like I think he sort of like filtered in reports that even in the German press, and they were reporting finding their sort of dead soldiers with arrows sticking out of them. I mean, this is how sort of far it went. I mean, it is quite something.
So, this little story he wrote just for a little newspaper in England, Sunny Takes Wildfire, and is now taken as read. We are on, we have angels on our side. Don't cross us. We are the righteous. And, it's just so fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, because, because when European nations go to war, and there is a bit of a predicament religiously, because you've got to sort of like Germany and England. I mean, we share the same religion, Christianity, so it's always a bit difficult to know, whose side is God on.
But unfortunately, God was on our side.
Well,
unfortunate for the Germans there.
Yeah, that's right. So there's always a battle in the background, sort of trying to get everyone's hopes, to cling to a religious sort of outcome that is favourable. We need to be seen as God's favourites.
This is true.
We were. That's why we won.
Now, unfortunately, journalists sort of had a bit of a free rein effectively. So any glimmer of information they were printing, lies were just, if you want, I mean, God, we've seen so much disinformation recently ourselves. We kind of get an idea of what it must have been like back in the day. And it, basically, journalists had a field day. They were just printing exactly what they wanted. So a story like this was just fantastic for them. It was just amazing. Now, official dispatches are only going to tell you the bare bones of what's going on. The journalists are the ones that have the artistic creation around that. Now, I think these days we're a lot more savvy to how journalists can twist things to fit in.
Well, yeah, sort of. Yes, we are sort of more knowing of what journalists are up to, and we do sort of read sort of certain sort of stuff, and even from certain publications we will tend to read with a pinch of salt. I mean, how many times have you said or made apologies when you quote something saying, well, this is from, this paper. So, and everyone goes, oh, I see. So we've got to take it with a pinch of salt. But back at the start of the 20th century, the public would not have had that filter. They would have taken as read what was being fed to them.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So fake news, or, the press exaggerating or making up stuff is not new. We've said this before as well. This isn't a new phenomena from the press. And it has been utilised in certain circumstances by certain people, John Charteris being one of them, to, for a reason. You know what I mean? There is a reason for this. It's not a massive conspiracy, but it's about opinion, isn't it? It's about garnering the right reasons for doing stuff. And there's no story, I think, that sums this up more than the story of the corpse factories in Germany. Now, in World War I, rumours began to spread that Germany were building corpse factories, right? These are different from the death camps that in World War II. This is something completely different. Now, there's a lot of death, there's a lot of dead bodies around, and there's a lot of lacking in supplies that you need, right? So certain products can be made from dead bodies, and I'm talking horses mainly on this one. Cows, horses, pigs nowadays, they're byproducts. They utilise products, bits of the stuff like that, right? All the bits and pieces, they do. It's not pleasant, but it happens. Even to this day, glue is one they make.
Glue from horses, rennet, which they use to fish. Rennet, isn't it? That's cows' stomachs, which they use to sort of make cheese go hard, don't they, and stuff like that. So
glycerin, all those sort of things you can get from corpses. Now, rumours started to appear, and this actually came out from the North China Herald in Shanghai, that that the Germans were stripping their dead behind the firing line and then bundling them basically into train carts and shipping them off to something called a corpse factory, right? Now, these were apparently 1,000 yards from the railway, connecting St. Vith from the near Belgian frontier. So they're shipping them off and utilising the corpses. Now, they're talking in terms of human corpse.
Yeah.
Now, this is very unpalatable. You can imagine. How disrespectful to the dead.
Yeah, even if they were Germans. I mean, even sort of people would have had us,
This is how they treat their own. What are they going to do to us if they get their grubby little mitts on us? They're prepared to treat their dead and send them to corpse factories. They are totally moralless, basically. It's a complete lie. That's not what was happening at all. But John Charteris utilised this. He was the one who actually planted the story in the China Post.
Oh, I suppose, sort of put it in a sort of obscure publication, and just wait for it to filter back down the line, I suppose, to get back to you.
Which is exactly what it did. There was a massive outcry at the time about this, that people were absolutely disgusted the Germans were doing this. They weren't doing it with humans, they were doing it with horses. You've got to remember, hell of a lot of dead horses going on around at the time. So they're utilising that in a time of great need. Even now, I mean, even in England, I think we view animals very differently, don't we? We like our animals. And even that would be like, oh my God, that's horrendous. Unfortunately, we do this too. We're not unique. This isn't a unique practice. It's something that happens even to this day. But because there was that small twist of corpse factories and didn't actually say horse corpse factories, everyone jumps to the assumption it was to do with human corpses. And he utilised this fake rumour to, again, turn opinion against the Germans. And why we need to be at this war. And it's not just about our own people. This is worldwide. People are reading this worldwide. So this has gone into the China. We wanted support from China at the time. So it was a way of going, oh my God, the Germans, they're really bad people. We've got to support the British efforts for this, because this is what these people are doing. So it's about, again, it's a political game.
It is. And, you've got to, and this is where you're really seeing, it's gone beyond sort of like the fighting and stuff. You've got to keep momentum up, because, you've got to keep the public behind the war. You don't want them to start, sort of starting to think about other things, sort of to question whether the war is right or not. I mean, and you don't want that. You've got to get your enemy, and you've got to dehumanise your enemy as well. And the corpse factories are a very good example of this.
Now, there was a picture taken. It showed a train taking dead horses, and it had on the side of the carriage what it was on the train carriage and everything what it was. He actually doctored that photo and changed it to show humans. He was very clever. Photoshop in its very early stages, everybody.
And but they were just taking horses to these places, sort of breaking them down, I suppose, especially on the continent, horse flesh is eaten quite regularly, you know, and the other byproducts you can actually get from them.
And there was a worry as well, obviously, of people that, you know, we've got our men over there, they're dying. Are the Germans taking their corpses?
Yeah, that's
as
right.
well, not just their own, but they're taking our sons and our fathers and our uncles and our, you know, workers, dead bodies. Are they then treating them like that? What's happening to our dead?
That's right.
Is that what's happening? Are they Germans doing that to ours? So you can imagine this caused a huge political furor about it all. But people continue to believe this, even though he has come out post-war and admitted it just was like a godsend kind of thing against the Germans. It really did cause a big controversy at the time. And that propaganda was a really big... Yeah. I mean, the worldwide publicity that was given to the statement that Germans boiled down human corpses in order to extract from them gelatin and other useful substances was just... God, he couldn't have asked for more in regards to anti-German talk, right?
Well, yeah. Yeah, and it worked.
In 1925, John Charteris actually admitted that he had invented the story when he was visiting New York City. It was reported in the New York Times. He gave a speech at a private dinner function at the National Arts Club, and he admitted that he provided false information to government ministers when they were asked about it in the House of Commons. He actually went on to say, the matter might have gone even further, for an ingenuous person in his office offered to write a diary of a German soldier, telling of his transfer from the front after 2 years of fighting to an easy berth in a factory, and of his horror at finding that he was to assist there in boiling down his brother's soldiers. He obtained a transfer to the front and was killed. It was planned to place this forged diary in the clothing of a dead German soldier and have it discovered by a war correspondent who had a passion for German diaries. But I think John Charteris actually decided the deception had gone far enough. It's done its job. It's had the impact it needed to have, and decided that the diary might be a step too far. So...
Incredible, isn't it?
It is incredible, but I think people shouldn't underestimate. We need to look. What's the old adage? Look back at history, because that's where the lessons are to be learned.
Well, yeah, of course it is. But we never do learn them anyway.
So what's reported in the media, we can't even guarantee that it's right. It could be a political manoeuvre from a body that's actually employed to do this.
That's right. Yeah.
At the time, it was incredibly useful, incredibly disgusting, and very, again, you could argue his morals, John Charteris's morals on this one, but he's out to win a war. Let's make no bones about this. We are out to win a war here, and he will use whatever means possible, even if that is false news or fake news or, you know, fake propaganda. He will use that if that's going to help us win the war.
Yeah, you've got to. Yeah, especially then. Yeah, the war was dragging on, and and you just need to keep everyone on side, because the last thing you need is people starting to sort of question it.
Exactly. Now, if you want to have a look at this a bit more, there is loads of stuff on it, because it hit the House of Commons, newspapers responded, it went backwards and forwards after the event quite a lot, but the basis is it was a lie to arouse people into the belief system of how bad the Germans were and they needed to be beaten, and we needed support from other countries, and this is one of the ways we got it.
So, I don't think the Germans helped themselves though, because didn't they have like human skin lamps and...
That was in World War II.
That's World War II.
Well, they must have been around then, just social media didn't catch them.
No, that came out of, unfortunately, those sort of things came out from the death camps in World War II.
Okay.
But our belief in how bad Germans could be, which in World War II they proved themselves, but this is sort of set the state that if they believe us to be this bad, then we'll be that bad.
I have to say, though, not all Germans were that bad.
No,
They were good ones.
No,
No,
you have good and bad on both sides, and you can't rank you can't compare World War One, World War Two just because the same countries are involved. You actually have to look so much deeper than that, and there is a lot of propaganda against the Germans when they weren't doing what they were being accused of. Unfortunately, World War Two, it's a bit different because we have got the genocide that runs alongside that within that. But as far as I'm aware, that didn't happen in World War One.
No, it didn't. No, it was just sort of
A military campaign against military campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, whereas World War Two was a whole different ball game.
We'll find that out next week.
Which we'll go into next week, because so that is a whole different ball game, and you do have to understand the political backdrops of how World War One kind of set up the scene for World War Two, and that's a whole different story in itself, and one that is just mind blowing when you think about it. Anyway, we're talking about paranormal occurrences. So that's we've talked about the Battle of Mons. We've talked about fake news, fake propaganda in how we get these, stories that come out there. But let's have a look at something that's a little bit more, I kind of want to say normal. It's not really normal, is it?
Well, something a bit more, paranormally traditional?
Yeah. So it's about the 5th Norfolk Battalion. Now, this actually happened during the Gallipoli. Thank you, Rich. These places, why can't they just have one syllable? That's all I can manage these days.
Well, you mean like Bonn?
Yeah. The Bonn. Yeah. Brilliant. I can manage Belgium.
Yeah.
But too many, adjectives in there. It's too much for my brain. Anyway, this happened.
Well, they'll all end up in the hospital. So you'd have to struggle with that word as well.
Exactly right. So, a military unit that was actually created by King Edward VII was known as the 5th Battalion Norfolk Regiment, the Sandringhams, otherwise known as the Norfolks.
Yes, it was regiments made up. It was a regiment made up of the workers on the King's estate.
That's it. Now, this happened in the Gallipoli, oh my goodness me, campaign. And basically they were securing the Dardanelles. Oh my God. Just as well I'm just as well I don't work in communications for the army, isn't it? They'd be like, where are we going? I don't know. Where's that? No idea.
You'll be all right. You'll be all right for code.
The Dardanelles Straits, yes. They sort of, it's the Dardanelles.
That's the one. Separates European Turkey from Asian Turkey, right?
Yes, that's right.
And it connects the Mediterranean with the Black Sea.
Yes, that's correct.
It's a sea route to Russia.
Basically, yes. So the Black Sea Fleet, they was trying to secure that, and so the Russians had access into the Mediterranean and beyond.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Well done, Richard. Give you 1 star.
Yes. Right, now, it wasn't very successful.
No. Unfortunately, no. It was sort of like a campaign. It was dragged up by someone who is very famous and who we'll probably speak about more next week, Winston Churchill. He was First Lord of the Admiralty during World War One. And it was a campaign because the Turks were on the German side. So it was a campaign to knock Turkey out of the war. And it was fought from that, it earned the war, and it was fought that this action alone could shorten the war or even end it if Germany lost one of its key allies.
Right. We need a map, don't we? With one of those world maps where you've got the arrows, like Dad's Army's opening scene, where you've got the arrows coming in, so you know who's where and whatnot. Anyway, the North Regiment was made up of 16 officers and 250 men. It was led by Sir Horace Proctor Beauchamp. Now, on the 30th of July 1915, they set out from Liverpool to the Gallipoli Peninsula They arrived on the 10th of August. 2 days after they arrived, they got the order to launch an attack against the Turks. Not particularly a good move, but, you know.
Well, yeah, that's what they were there to do.
Yeah. The men themselves weren't in great condition. They had a lot of seasickness, lack of sleep. The temperature wasn't, very kind to them. We've just come from England to scorching hot temperatures, very dry area. So they're in an area they've not had time to acclimatise, basically.
They were formed, very rudimentary training, and then they were put on the ship and off they went. And they literally didn't have time to do anything when they got there. It was straight off the boat and straight into frontline service.
A lot of them were
duties. Yeah.
They had dysentery.
Because they were all just, you can imagine sort of, you're working in the fields on the King's estate in Sandringham sort of 1 week, and within about 6 or 8 weeks you're on the Gallipoli Peninsula. I mean, it was quick.
Mm-hmm. On top of that, they had poor supplies, inaccurate maps, lack of water, and they're fighting the Turkish on their home turf, basically. They know how to fight in these conditions, but we ain't got a clue.
No, that's right. It was, and the Turks are well dug in, and they were expecting it. And yes, and it's always, you've got a determined enemy on their home soil. That's always a bit of a nightmare for military commanders to deal with.
Mm-hmm. On top of that, the orders were a bit confusing. The objective of the mission, now this is key to any military action. You have to know what you're doing, what your objection is, what are you supposed to be doing, and aim for that and stay focused on that. Don't get sidetracked, basically. Now, some of them thought that they were supposed to be attacking the village of the Anafarta saga, while others were simply thought that they were just supposed to clear the way. That sounds really bad, doesn't it? The Anafarta saga.
She's off.
Oh, dear. Yeah. They were supposed to simply clear the way. So the men made a mistake. They got separated from the rest of the 163rd Brigade, turned in the wrong direction. Now, they think they realised their mistake, but they continue to advance towards the Kavek Tepe without reinforcement or support. They're now completely cut off. Now, the Turks basically had a field day. They had a machine gun fire on them, numerous snipers, and they, bless them, bless their cotton socks, they still managed to push the Turks back towards the forest. Yeah. Right? They had a good artillery fire on this. So, bless them. They had a good go.
Yeah. They gave it what they had.
One thing you've got to say about the British, we're tenacious little things, aren't we?
Yeah, bit of the bulldog spirit there, yeah.
Most definitely. This is why the bulldog is one of the biggest symbols of the British, because we are tenacious.
I have to say as well, at the beginning of the show, you said we kept retreating. We didn't retreat. We advanced in a different direction.
Is that what we did?
That's what we, yeah.
So it wasn't strategic retreat, yeah.
Yeah, it's a strategic advance in a different direction.
Well, these guys didn't retreat at all. They're pushing forward and pushing the Turks back.
Well, they were advancing, so like we did. We just went the other way.
Now, the forest is on fire from all this artillery that's gone on, right?
Yep.
And they followed the Turks into the fire. So they've gone into this burning forest. They never got seen again. Now, logically, you think, well, they're entering a burning forest, for God's sakes. You know what I mean? Hardly surprising, but there is a load of rumour and speculation about actually what happened on this one. Because their bodies were never found at the time.
Yeah, and I've actually seen this sort of story. It is actually still toted around on the internet as a mysterious story, and I think the alien abduction sort of people quite like this one.
They do, because a mist was seen. Well, I have to argue, there's a forest on fire, good sakes.
Yeah,
there's going to be a lot of smoke.
But yeah, and that whole Peninsula. Yeah, it's sort of low-lying sort of scrub. So it is, yeah. It's not a big sort of forest like you would imagine a forest. It's low-lying scrub, olive trees and olive groves and stuff like that.
Now, the British Commander-in-Chief in Gallipoli, General Sir Ian Hamilton, was just as confused as everybody else. He didn't know. He couldn't come up with an answer. But he can't find any bodies. Can't find the battalion. What's happened to them? So they've got nothing. There's nothing. Literally, they can't say one way or the other. They can't say that they're dead because there's no bodies, and they can't say that they're alive because there's no bodies either. If that makes sense, right?
Yeah,
so
that's
you can imagine
right.
the families were absolutely, totally distraught. Now, a lot of rumours and speculation came up about this. They even asked some of the, there is dispatch, believe it or not, there is communication going on between the warring factions. So you have higher levels of people talking to higher levels in the opposite camp, as it were. So they did ask.
Usually go through like a neutral embassy or something like that. They would sort of perhaps in Istanbul, the British probably sent a delegation to a neutral embassy and the Turk a delegation as well, so they can have a chat about it.
Yeah, to see if we could find any trace of these men. At the time this was. So the Red Cross were asked, the American ambassador was asked to see if they could find if these men were in a Turkish prisoner of war camp, for example. Messages were published in papers, nothing. Even after the war was over, there was no trace of these men ever found in any of these places. They didn't find the bodies, They didn't find them in prisoner of war camps, they didn't find anything. Now, this is where things start to happen in regards to supernatural accounts. Now, a former sailor, Frederick Reichardt, issued a never-before-heard testimony. This was after the war in 1965.
Right.
He claimed, and this apparently was supported by 3 other veterans, that on that particular afternoon they saw a formation of 6 or 8 loaf-shaped clouds that hovered over the area where the Sandringhams were fighting. One of these low-lying clouds descended even lower over the men, and after an hour or so it rose very unobtrusively and joined the other clouds and sailed off. When the men on the ground could see the forest clearly, there was no sign of the soldiers. Now, this is the main point of where the ufology world stepped in. They took this, ran it. This is alien abduction.
Yeah, that's right.
On that note, we've actually come to the end of the first half.
Oh, right.
On that bombshell, we need a doof, Paul.
Doof, 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 doof.
Join us right after this.
Hello, Harry Price here. If there's nothing me and my friends enjoy more here on the other side, it is to sit back and relax and listen to the Paranormal Concept Show, right here on the PAUK Radio Network. Broadcasting a plethora of interesting and informative content for all your paranormal needs. Find them across social media to keep up to date with forthcoming shows and all their other adventures. Hello, is there anybody there?
And welcome back to the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Now, before the break, we were talking about the missing battalion of the Sandringhams, and we said that no bodies had been found, didn't know what had happened to them. We've gone into this, the main reason from this account from a former sailor from the New Zealand that had basically the ufology world had kind of jumped all over as to alien abduction. However, we kind of think that's a load of bunkum, quite frankly, because in 1919, a battalion's chaplain, the Reverend Pierpoint Edwards, claimed that he found the missing bodies. Now, according to Edward, only 2 of the deceased could be identified, Privates Barnaby and Private Carter, and he found the bodies spread across an area of approximately 1 square mile, at least 800 yards away from the Turkish front line.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like they probably got pretty close and then all expired.
For some
probably
reason,
all shot.
The account was not believed.
Ah.
For some reason, I don't know why and whatnot. One thing's for sure, the gentlemen of that particular battalion fought with immense courage and fortitude against great odds, and nothing should be taken away from them for their
No.
heroism, effectively, under very trying conditions.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
On that one. So I don't think it's a paranormal occurrence per se, but I do think because there's been no definitive answer on that one, I think that's why people have jumped onto a supernatural explanation, even though somebody has said that they found the bodies. So, why was it not believed? Maybe believing in the supernatural is easier sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not as far fetched as a UFO come down and kidnap them all. So they went with that, obviously.
Who knows? But maybe there's still the chance that it'd come back.
Yeah, it's just that glimmering sort of hope, isn't it? That I think they were probably edging their bets on they were sort of in a Turkish prisoner of war camp.
Yeah. Sad one, that one. Now, at the beginning of the show, we touched on trench warfare. Now, these were an intricate network of claustrophobic canals on both sides from which enemies blasted at each other as they hid inside, and there was a lot of death around them. In between these trenches, there was an area called No Man's Land. This is basically a scorched, beaten land no one dare tread, basically. When we talk about going over the edge, we're talking about crossing this no man's land to try to take over other trenches. Many ways were tried to get around this, from tunnelling. All sorts of things were tried to avoid this, but it just ended up being, it was explained as close to hell on Earth, basically.
Yeah. And when it came to the attack, tunnelling could only do so much. They used to tunnel and plant mines under the German trenches and just sort of clear them. But apart from that, and if you're going to sort of mount an attack, you would have to go over the top.
Now, obviously, while you're crossing no man's land, you're open, basically. They're going to be firing at you. So in all of this, there's a lot of death and suffering, and a lot of tales of the supernatural come from the trenches of World War One, and you can imagine that some of these are very, very dependent on psychological condition at the time, I would say.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's all there, isn't it? It's got all the ingredients of a sort of like, the spectre of death, literally sort of stalking you.
And you're looking over this no man's land as well.
Well, if you dare put your head above the trench,
You've got to be, strange occurrences did happen. Now, some of these are very, again, anecdotal. They're very remiss in detail, should we say?
Yeah.
One of these was from a Scottish soldier. Now, he had been assigned as a sentry in France on the battle line on the Western Front, an area of northern France and Belgium. Now, this saw a lot of fighting, very fierce fighting in this area. Now, the witness is only known as Jock, typical.
Yeah, good old Scottish name there.
Good old Jock.
Jock McPlot.
Now, he says he saw one evening something very bizarre. Now, it was full moon. He claimed he was wide awake and alert, but that passing by, he saw a pair of spectral dun-coloured bloodhounds coupled together by a short steel chain, making their way across the battle-torn earth. He quoted as, "First I'd heard one faint note in the distance, and the deep, mournful bay had caused me to grip my rifle and keep alert. In fact, I'd been searching for a hound as far as my eyes could search the flat, treeless, moonlit countryside. Then all at once there they were before my eyes, and just as suddenly they were gone, with the sound of their baying in my ears." Now, he recounted this tale to a few other soldiers, and they claimed to have seen them as well. Now, this reminds me of the Black Shuck Law.
Yeah.
There is a bit of that to it, isn't there? Thinking about it, sort of. But, is it not too far? I mean, there perhaps would have been sort of stray animals sort of wandering about the battlefields and stuff. I mean, I don't know. What about you guys?
Yeah, I mean, if there was a German bloke with a couple of dogs, because they had dogs as well, didn't they? If the master got shot, the dogs are off their lead, aren't they?
Mm.
So there's going to be strays all over the country, all over the countryside. So to find two dogs wandering the battlefields, I should imagine isn't going to be too much of a leap to make.
Well, I think the soldiers at the time took them as like a forewarning, quite frankly, a foreboding, omen. Yeah, omen is the word. They said that these phantom dogs almost always seem to appear right before something big was about to go down. It's almost like they was following the smell of incoming death.
Yeah, but then could they just be scouring the battlefields and things for food?
It wouldn't surprise me.
Because the smell from rotting flesh, I should imagine, isn't going to be too pleasant to us. But
you've got
starving dogs,
the spectral hounds. But a lot of soldiers, I should imagine, would have been familiar with the black shuck law because they came from all over the country. I mean, Yorkshires have got it up in Yorkshire. They're called different names, so you can understand why
they've jumped to the assumption.
Sort of, yeah. Because, say sort of even alleged black shark sightings here in the UK are often a portent of something bad's going to happen, isn't it?
Mm.
What's interesting actually is in Scotland they're actually not seen as bad. They're seen as like caretakers, guardians. The folklore of black shuck up Scotland is different.
Yeah.
To what it is in England. Like the south of England is almost like the omen, the bad, the foreboding, whereas Scotland...
It's quite a regional phenomenon, isn't it? I mean, it's especially here where we are in East Anglia, it's more of a forewarning, isn't it? Mm-hmm. If they are spotted.
Whereas up Scotland, it's not. They're seen as guardians. So it does depend. So it does... What's the majig? My brain's gone. It does sort of like depend on your region as to where you are, but you can understand how this has come about. Even if it was something rational, like Paul says, dogs scavenging in this no man's land in between quiet periods, even a big fox or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because there is going to be wild animals around still. They've cleared the area, but they still would have been there. Anyway, there's another tale. Now, this is quite an interesting one. This one came out from the Battle of Verdun. Now, this was a longer-lasting battle of the entire war. It saw a bloody, merciless battle of attrition between French and German forces. Now, some of the men on the front line began to tell of a ghostly soldier dressed in old-fashioned gear from the 1870s Franco-Prussian War. Now, with long, flowing white beard and rosy cheeks. That reminds me of Santa Claus, quite frankly. This apparition was said to appear out of thin air to come to the aid of the French, and tales of the spectral old man's escapades were numerous. Apparently, he would knock the weapons out of the hands of the enemy or cause them to trip over. Great. Thank you very much for that little help.
Well, have some of that, thank you.
Yeah. Other times he was reported as guiding the French and showing them where to go, or even physically pushing them out of harm's way, with many a soldier telling of being knocked to the ground by the ghost, just as a bullet whizzed by where their head should have been. And there were also reports of the ghost tending to the wounded or even offering a drink of water before vanishing into thin air.
Oh, yeah.
Now, that is more of a ghostly tale, isn't it? I should imagine,
Ghost of St. John.
Yeah.
Quite possibly. But again, you can't deny that under extreme conditions, your brain will do all sorts of weird and wonderful things.
Well, Verdun's in France, and Verdun was fought over during the Franco-Prussian War, and it was the French against the Germans then, back in 1870. So you could possibly see, there's certainly a precedent there, and you can see why the French would want to believe something like this is going on.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And maybe it did.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were loads of accounts of strange men getting involved and ghostly people getting involved. Now, the Belgian municipality of Ypres, that is Ypres, isn't it? Famous skiing resort now, I believe.
No idea.
But no, there's no skiing resorts in Belgium.
Ypres. Thought that was a skiing resort.
No, I think you're thinking somewhere else, but carry on.
Anyway, this was besieged by fearsome combat in its strategic position as a block against the Germans' advance into France. The city itself was actually pummeled during the First World War and was also victim to mass poison gas attacks in 1915. Now, this time, the strange account would come from a French engineer who told the tale to an American clergyman. Now, this is a strange one. I found this very strange when I looked into this one.
Right.
Now, they looked out over no man's land. So the battalion that this is referring to looked out across no man's land. They saw a strange grey cloud rolling towards them. When it struck, pandemonium broke out. Men dropped all around him and the trench was in uproar. This is a gas attack.
Well, yes, it is a gas attack. Yeah. It can't be anything else.
Okay.
Surely, yeah.
Exactly. Out of the mist, walking across no man's land, came a figure. He seemed to be without no special protection. He wore the uniform of a Royal Army Medical Corps. He spoke English and had a French accent to it. So he was English, but he spoke with a French accent. Okay. On his belt, the stranger had a series of small hooks on which were suspended tin cups. In his hand, he carried a bucket of what looked like water. As he slid down into the trench, he began removing the cups, dipping them into the bucket and passing them out to the soldiers, telling them to drink it quickly. The engineer was amongst those who received the potion. He said it was extremely salty, almost too salty to swallow, but all of the soldiers who were given the liquid did drink it. Not one of them suffered lasting effects from the gas. When the gas cloud had blown over and things calmed down, the unusual visitor was not to be found. No explanation could be given by the Royal Medical Corps, but the fact remained that thousands of soldiers died or suffered lasting effects from that particular attack, but not a single soldier who took the cup from the stranger was amongst the victims.
Were they all British?
They're French.
No, they're French.
Oh, but they were on our side, though, weren't they?
Yeah.
Well,
that just goes to prove God was on our side.
Well, I looked into this, as you do, because I thought, okay, this could have a rational explanation. In amongst this gas attack, now bearing in mind the gas that was used, mustard gas.
Yeah.
Generally, there were variations on mustard gas, but it's generally accepted it was generally mustard gas throughout World War One. Affected your breathing and your eyes, so your eyes would be streaming. You couldn't breathe, and you died a horrible death, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They used gas masks to, combat this, basically. But if it had got onto your skin, it was very virulent. It was a horrible way of dying.
Yeah.
But they did look at ways of combating this, the effects of mustard gas. What could cure mustard gas attacks if you did get affected by it, right? What was interesting was there was a potion that was used by the Royal Medical Corps. It was made of a liquid of water, bicarbonate of soda, and there were other things in it as well, like cocaine was put in there and there was a few other bits and bobs. But bicarbonate of soda stuck out in my head because it's quite salty when you taste it.
Really?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, that's weird.
Yeah.
So, the mystery deepens.
Yeah.
So the potion that he's allegedly given to these people who was suffering from the mustard gas attack,
Mhm.
is actually being given something that was incredibly salty to swallow, and that is the kind of thing that they would have used. There's no cure.
Yeah.
I would like to say this. There was no actual cure for it. It helped manage the symptoms of it, but there was no actual cure. So I don't know if you could go as
There's
far
definitely
as...
a joke in there somewhere. I'm not going there, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, I'm going to just gloss that one over, Paul.
Yeah, you better. Yeah. I'll tell you after the show.
Okay. I'm sure people listening has probably already got that one.
Probably.
But I don't know. I just found that incredibly interesting.
It could have just been a member of the medical corps in the right place at the right time.
With the right potion?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, or yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's nothing more. I mean, we've just got the written account here, haven't we? And yeah, and what Kerry found out on top of that, it's sort of, it's interesting.
It is. It's fascinating. I say I looked into what if there was, a potion, and could it have been a member of the corps that was out there, just happened to be there at the right place at the right time with the right potion? Who knows? Do you know what I mean? But it does seem strange that the potion they used was incredibly salty when they were treating this, and that backs up what the guy said he was given.
Yeah.
It was strange. Not the only account, though. Various visions of phantom cavalrymen would be tearing through the war zone at the 1914 Battle of Le Cateau and go right through enemy fire without suffering any notable damage, and often appearing and disappearing out of nowhere at a moment's notice, sometimes even attacking the enemy while they were at it. One report of these horsemen was told to the Daily Mail by former Lieutenant Colonel of the British Expeditionary Force. Now, this goes back, I think, to the Battle of the Mons time, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, it's early, yeah, and if it's the British Expeditionary Force, that is the first army that was sent over, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, he allegedly had said that we were talking and doing our best to keep from falling asleep on our horses. As we rode along, I became conscious of the fact that in the fields on both sides of the roads along which we were marching, I could see a large body of horsemen. These horsemen had appearance of squadrons of cavalry, and they seemed to be riding across the fields and going in the same direction as we were going and keeping level with us. Did not say a word about it at first, but I watched them for about 20 minutes. The other two officers stopped talking. At last, one of them asked me if I saw anything in the fields, and I told them what I had seen. The third officer then confessed that he too had been watching these horsemen for the last 20 minutes. They were so convinced they were real cavalry that at the next halt, one of the officers took a party of men out to have a look, basically. Found no one there.
Reconnoitre.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Found no one there. Night grew darker. They didn't see them anymore. Now, these were seen by many others. They all described the same thing. And at times, these were witnessed by more than just one person at a time. So we're talking about what, mass hallucination? Mass psychosis? Or are we talking that maybe
I don't know.
There?
I mean, you're talking early stages of the war, and there was sort of a doctrine that they thought cavalry were to be used, but they weren't actually used in fighting per se. You would use cavalry to reconnoitre ahead and to protect the flanks of your army. So to have horsemen to the side of you, it'd be interesting to find out where, well, we won't now, but where these men who actually witnessed this were in the column. But if they were towards the edge of the column, it could have just been the cavalry unit that was there to escort them. Because that's a long time to actually view an alleged apparition, 20 minutes.
Yeah, it certainly is. However, Lance Corporal Johnson said that they had been marching a whole day and night with 1.5 hours rest in between. They found themselves on the outskirts of Langley near Paris just at dawn, and as the day broke, we saw in front of us large bodies of cavalry, all formed up into squadrons, Fine big men on massive chargers. I remember turning to my chums in the ranks and saying, thank God we are not far off Paris now. Look at the French cavalry. They too saw them quite plainly, but on getting closer, to our surprise, the horsemen vanished and gave place to banks of white mist with clumps of trees and bushes dimly showing through. Now, this has all been linked into the Angel of the Mons encounter.
Yeah.
But this is sort of a separate thing. Now, upon being questioned, he said, of course, we were all dog-tired and overtaxed. It was an extraordinary thing that the same phenomena should be witnessed by so many different people. He is absolutely convinced that he saw these horsemen, and he's 100% convinced that they did not exist only in his own imagination. He can't explain it, he just states what he saw.
Early morning, fog, mist, again, could have been real cavalry. And sort of then once the soldiers got to where they're supposed to be, they no longer needed the assistance of the cavalry to sort of like flank their march.
I don't know. I can't answer it, and neither can the man that witnessed it.
Yeah.
Or the men that witnessed it. All they can do is report what they saw, and that be that. You would think if it had been a real life cavalry, that would have been reported.
It seems interesting now. You're actually getting quite solid reports from men in the field, whereas what we spoke about at the top of the show, the Angels and Mons, was very sort of, there was really nothing coming out of the field. It was all manufactured back home. But now you're starting to hear tales from people who are actually there, which is interesting.
Yeah, you are. But again, how much of this is hearsay after the event? I'm not going to take it out. I'm not going to take out a supernatural occurrence. I think you can't. You can't explain it. You can't attempt to explain it because you weren't there, for one. You can't dismiss it. You can look at various facts, like you say. You can go back in history and look at, the military records of who was what, who was where, when. What was actually on the field, was there French cavalry, blah, blah, blah. But if you can't back it up, you can't then dismiss it just because
that's right. No,
facts.
I'm not trying to dismiss it because I do like a good sort of a ghostly tale and as much as the next person. But, ghostly cavalrymen, why not?
Now let's look into some more personal accounts, because not always are accounts all to do with the battles themselves or, the people en masse. Sometimes it's very individual tales. Now, Tim Cook, who's a Canadian historian and researcher, found a story about a Canadian soldier in the trenches who was apparently saved by the ghost of his dead mother, who appeared and drew him away from where a German shell would hit moments later. In his diary, he wrote, "One night, whilst carrying bombs, I had occasion to take cover when about 20 yards off I saw you, looking toward me as plain as life. I crawled nearly to the place where your vision appeared. Had it not been for you, I certainly would have been reported missing. You'll turn up again, won't you, Mother, next time a shell is coming?"
It's got all the hallmarks of a crisis apparition, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we hear reports again and again of well-loved people appearing post-death or on their point of death to another to warn or to save.
That's the first time I've heard of a crisis apparition in the reverse. It's usually sort of like it's someone from the trenches going back to a loved one who's just sort of they would see them coming down the garden path or something. It's the first time I've actually seen it. I've heard of one with a civilian going to sort of help someone out in the field, their son or loved one. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, it's sad as well. It's like, Mum, you please look after me. Do it again, if ever I'm in that situation. Here's another one for you. This is quite a well-known tale. Oh dear. It's the story of Corporal Will Baird of the 42nd Battalion. This was also called the Black Watch, the Royal Highland Regiment of Canada. During a battle at Vimy Ridge in the April of 1917, he says that he had fallen asleep in the cold down out there in the dugout, but was awoken by two warm hands upon him. When he looked up, he allegedly saw standing there his brother Steve, who had been killed in action in France 2 years prior. The apparition of his brother stood wordlessly and silently walked off, beckoning Will to follow. He followed his dead brother to a bombed-out ruin of a building out in the middle of the battlefield, after which Steve would dissipate right before his eyes. It was not long after this that an enemy shell slammed it into the bunker where he had been moments before, completely obliterating it and killing everyone inside. Now, Corporal Baird would go on to write of this strange encounter in his 1968 book, Ghosts Have Warm Hands, a memoir of the Great War. These accounts are very real to the people that it happened to.
Yes, well, the circumstances they're in, and you can't discount them, surely. I mean,
at the end of the day, it is a personal experience, and you've got to question whether it is actually morally right to take that away from someone.
Yeah.
If that's what they believe, then why not?
Yeah.
You can't prove or disprove it. It's, again, you've got to take someone's account of it.
Yeah.
You've got to. You can't do anything else on these kind of encounters.
Oh no.
Another one for you. This is from December of 1915, from the trenches of Ypres, where 2nd Lieutenant William M. Spite of the 3rd Battalion, West Yorkshire Regiment, was taking cover from the enemy onslaught. At the time, Spite was afraid, as the fighting had become a true bloodbath, and his close friend had died earlier that very day. He sat there, cowering under the booming shells and gunfire outside. His dead friend suddenly came nonchalantly strolling into the trench with him. Spate called for another soldier to come and see what he was seeing, but the friend vanished into thin air. The following evening, the apparition returned, this time walking to a spot in the dugout and pointing at the earth below before once again evaporating. Acting on instinct, Spate grabbed a shovel, dug at the spot to find a load of enemy explosives with a timer set to blow them to smithereens in 13 hours. Plenty of time for him and his fellow soldiers to evacuate before they were killed. We talked about how they tunnelled and built and then would lay mines and explosives to sort of dig out the trenches. On both sides did this. And this is an account of that, but an account of an apparition pointing it out and saving the soldiers before the explosive went off.
Well, yeah. It certainly does sound that he sunk the Germans had mined, and he sort of dug down. He must have dug down a fair bit, though, to actually find it. But,
Well, no, because I've seen a report on one of these, this kind of thing that went on, and trenches weren't all uniform in depth. They were different in depth. May not have actually had to have digged down that far. There were accounts of trenches actually collapsing into these tunnels.
Right.
Because they misjudged it. And
the miners would have misjudged, the height above them. Yeah.
And also, when they're in the tunnels digging these kind of tunnels, they could often hear the Germans digging another tunnel, not 2 or 3 foot away from where they're digging. So there was a lot that going on under the ground as much as above the ground. Honestly, it's horrendous when you look into this.
Yeah, imagine being a miner.
You just can't imagine it. You literally just can't imagine it.
Sure, that'd be the engineering corps, wouldn't it?
Well, the Royal Corps of Engineers, they also, if you were a miner in Civvy Street as well, that's probably where you would have ended up sort of going into they would have had you, snapped you up to go into Royal Corps of Engineers, and that, no. Fighting underground. I couldn't think of anything more horrific.
Can't think anything more horrific than any of this, to be fair, whether it's above ground or underground. It's just all it's all just horrific, quite frankly.
As long as they're wombling free.
Oh, I see. Yep, got that one. You can't deny that the conditions that these poor men were fighting under was absolutely horrific. Oh, excuse the children going off at it in the background. Where were these men really? I'm going to kill him. Could
There'll be one more ghost in Kerry's house.
Yeah, another ghost in my house. Now, can we really take this as paranormal? Are we looking at something that's just illusions or hallucinations born out of this terrifying situation that men are under? For one, I think you have to look at it in that way because you are being pushed to limits that you wouldn't. You can't. Again, it's one of those you can't put yourself. You've got to put yourself in that situation. No one knows how you would react until you're in that situation. You can't. You can't imagine how it is unless you lived it.
I think, yes, you can't take that equation out of it, you know, even if you do feel all right, surely the psychological effect of being in these places for any length of time will have an effect.
I think and that's the case. I mean, you're also... it's not just the gunfire. You know, you've got mustard gas coming in. You've got the conditions of just the physical trauma that you're going through. Your body is being pushed to limits that you can't even imagine on every level. You know, we not even talked about the emotional impact. I mean, God, I go away for a week on holiday and I get incredibly homesick. It's very debilitating. So these men probably haven't even been out their own village or the farmstead or where they've lived, and they're thrust into these conditions, and you just can't. I just don't think you can. You just can't imagine it.
No, you can't.
It's one of those that you would have had to have lived through to truly understand, and you don't know yourself until you've been through something like that.
No, you don't. And these sort of stories which they're coming up with, you can't sort of. You certainly can't brush them to one side. I mean, I mean, soldiers have got better things to do than to sit there and make stuff up.
Yeah, and the last thing you're going to do is think of a fairy tale, right?
And you're in a trench and you've got work to do, regardless if it's not sort of sniping over the top, you know, sort of like just the day-to-day living in the trench or repairing and stuff like that, and sort of making sure.
Although they did make trench art, didn't they?
Well, yeah, they did have sort of and a bit of spare time, but you know, the high command knew enough. You know, you don't have your soldiers idle whilst they're in the front line. I mean, that's where you have your rest trenches for when they rotate. I think on average a soldier would spend 3 weeks in the front line, and then they rotate them out to the support trenches, and they would stay there for 3 weeks, and then 1 week off in the local town, I think, and it's pretty much your routine.
Yeah. I don't know. I think. Oh, I don't know. I just think it's you don't know your own capability sometimes until you're put into an extreme circumstance.
Oh yeah, and let's face it, we live in very fortunate times, and we have never had to sort of been confronted with something like this. I know people say this current situation we're in is like a war. We've got to battle, you know, the virus, so to speak. But even this is sort of what we've been asked to do. It doesn't come anywhere close to what the people we are talking about were asked to do. Well, they weren't even asked to do; they were told to do it.
For the glory of God.
Well, yeah.
For what was it? For the country, for your country.
Yeah, king and country.
King and country.
And it was your duty to do, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think you can take out the psychological impact of this. But then on the same score, if extreme emotional stress is a precursor for a paranormal phenomena,
Yeah.
it's hardly surprising that we've got stories coming out from soldiers that, having had them, they're under extreme conditions. You know, if you're going to have an encounter, then you're more likely to get one under those conditions than just any old time. But then some would argue that.
Yeah.
See, surely as well, you'd have a lot of soldiers suffering shell shock, which is PTSD that we know of now.
Yes.
And you know, people there would report hallucinating things. So it's, it's not.
You would have a medical reason, and as you say, Paul, I mean, shell shock, what it was called then, you know, it's called something different now.
PTSD.
But, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and but you know, but that fortunately that has been recognised now, and I think the military do jump on that pretty quick now if they suspect you of suffering from it.
Yeah, definitely. They've got better mental health awareness.
Yeah.
You know, but back then, you know, you could quite easily say that one of these hallucinations could be, to them, a paranormal phenomena.
Well, yeah.
But crisis ghosts don't just happen under these kind of circumstances, do they?
No.
We hear accounts of people who, you know, they're not there at their parents' death, and then the parent visits them, or a good friend visits them, and then they get in contact, or 2 weeks later they found out that person had died at that particular time.
That's right. This is as we touched on earlier, the crisis apparition, which is, it actually has its own name, doesn't it? You know, the crisis apparition. In the lexicon of sort of ghostly terms, you have your residual hauntings, you have residual, sort of intelligent, and a couple of others, poltergeist is thrown in there, and you have your crisis apparition. It is a known fact within, well, not a fact, but it is well sort of known in the paranormal field.
I knew when my nana died. I wasn't at the hospital. I knew she was on her way, as it were. But I knew when she had died. I knew the moment she had died. And then when my mum got back from the hospital at the early hours of the morning, she said, woke me up, said she's passed. And I said, yeah, I know. She passed at about, I think it was 12 minutes past 1 in the morning. She was like, oh. And I was like, I just knew it.
Yeah.
You know.
So.
But was that like as a mediumship thing, or was it It wasn't a visitation, was it?
It wasn't a visitation, no. It wasn't. I can't say it was because I didn't see her. But I knew when she'd gone.
Yeah, more of an intuition.
They call it a psychic SOS, don't they? Sometimes. It's almost like a telepathic energy emitted at a time of extreme emotional distress.
Yeah.
It's not always immediately followed by death. Sometimes these apparitions have occurred when the individual is still alive, during like an attack or an illness. There are accounts of that come as well. So, you know, it's not always about the death factor, as it were. I think it's a very interesting phenomena.
Oh, it certainly is, yeah. I mean, it sort of, it probably says a lot more about us as well as individuals and what makes us tick.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be interesting to sort of find out more about that. As I say, I'm not too well versed in that sort of area. It's just the anecdotal stories you hear, isn't it?
It is, but I do think, you know, I heard of an account of a hairdresser, and every month this person would come and visit her, and they would chat, and she'd do the hair, and it was absolutely fine. And then you know, he was going through a bad time in his life. He was getting divorced from his wife. You know, he'd lost his boy and girl in the ensuing battle. You know, all sorts of things. And then he'd come to get his hair cut, and he'd said, I can't stay long, but I just wanted to say thank you. And then she found out that he'd died. He'd committed suicide the previous morning. So it was like, who was I talking to? I was talking to him. He couldn't have died. I was talking to him. He came by and said thank you for everything. But they class that as a crisis apparition. It's very eerie when we get these, you know. And we talk about the trenches of the World War. Are they triggers, or are they just loved ones in spirit saving their loved ones on Earth?
Yeah.
You know, it's different from guardian angel. They tend to be when we talk about guardian angels, we see them more as like an angelic energy, something that's not necessarily somebody you know, but just somebody that comes in at a time and saves you and then disappears out of your life. You know, crisis apparitions tend to be a person you know, that appearing before you, and then you find out they're dead. Or they were ill, or they were on, I don't know, something bad was going on at the time or something. I don't know. We do have accounts where we seem to have a connection with people. Twins have this quite a lot, where a twin will be able to tell what the other one's going on. If the other one's if they're not together, you get twin encounters where, you know, what goes on with one twin, if they're distressed or whatever and they're not together, the other twin will know. Mm-hmm. We've had twin encounters where one's given birth and the other one's gone into false labour alongside it. It was like, oh, she's giving birth, I'm going to go through this experience. It's just one of those. Phone calls from the dead is another one, isn't it? Where you get a phone call from somebody that's passed over.
Well, yeah, that is quite a phenomenon at the moment. I'm actually, there's an article in this month's edition of Fortean Times that actually talks about that, and that is on the rise. You know, it seems that the paranormal world does actually keep up with modern technology as well, because they can even text. You know,
but that would stand to reason, though, wouldn't it? Because as humans, we're all connected to our phones, let's be fair. We cannot leave home without our mobile phone. If I was to die, and I could utilise that as a tool, I'd know how, for one, because I use it in my day-to-day life normally. You know what I mean? Secondly, it's a way of doing it.
Well, yes. I mean, if you believe in the narrative that ghosts are sort of, you know, spirits of dead people, then there is no reason why they couldn't communicate through modern day devices.
Especially if it's a modern day ghost.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Because I mean, you know, we go to like Victorian locations on an investigation, and we use Victorian methods to communicate, because that's the era that they know. If you go to a location that's only had activity because, you know, maybe like their son died or the mother died and there's things going on in their house, it stands to reason that person, if it is the spirit of that person, they would know modern day ways of communication.
Yeah.
I've had an account of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was. I'd interviewed somebody and a while ago, and then I came up, booted my computer up, and I had a missed call on Skype from the person who had died.
Right.
Never had a problem since. They never contacted me through since, but I had a missed call from Skype from somebody who was dead. I was like, what? How does that work?
Okay. Yeah.
Why me?
Yeah.
Weren't close to them. I just interviewed them. Very strange. Okay, to say it's a technical blip, a blip, you know, a glitch. But it just seems weird that person. I mean, I don't get missed calls on Skype from people. It doesn't happen.
No, I was sort of thinking about it. Yeah, so my Skype never really plays up. Yeah, it does what it's supposed to do. I don't get any sort of
I
any
don't on my
sort of.
mobile phone. I don't get like missed calls from dead people. I I barely get phone calls from living people.
Oh dear.
But no, most people text now or WhatsApp or whatever it is, whatever medium it is you use. You know what I mean? So it was unusual, but it doesn't prove anything. It could have been just one of those things. You know what I mean?
Just one of those things. Yeah.
Can't explain it. I didn't go to the partner and ask because I felt that was a bit like, was you playing around on that person's Skype last night? You know, like, oh, one of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it was weird. I did think, that's weird. I say it's never happened again since. Don't have problems normally on Skype, you know, or on my phone or anything like that. Can spirit communicate through TV? We were on a show one night looking at paranormal apps that all of a sudden my TV went full blast. Literally, volume 100. I never have it on 100, I have it on 20. And yet that TV turned on at volume 100. Whilst I was on air talking about paranormal apps, we'd actually been trying out an app on air this particular night. It was a couple of years ago now with Brian Holloway. I can't explain that. That TV has never, or that TV then, because I've got a new one since then, never done it before, never done it since, until the point I got rid of it. Just even when it was, I got rid of it because it was mucking up. But even at the point of it was mucking up, it never did it. Can you explain that? I can't explain that.
Ghost did it.
Ghost did it? Did it? Was it just...
Your demon done it.
Maybe my demon did do it. Who knows? I can't explain it. It doesn't mean to say it was paranormal, but it doesn't mean to say it wasn't.
Yeah.
Oh, it's all interesting stuff, isn't it? Well, I say, and this is what we're in it for, isn't it? You know, to sort of look at these sort of slightly out of the ordinary occurrences that do seem to happen to people.
They do. To the normal, everyday person. We're not talking... I mean, all right, we've been talking about World War One tonight and the extreme conditions that have happened under there. You would think that a lot more stories would have come out about that. Maybe people didn't talk about it. Maybe they... You know, maybe we are dismissive of our own experiences and go, actually, that's just having a weird moment, and don't talk about it because it sounds so bizarre in the grand scheme of things. I mean, how many times have we said when we've recounted things that have happened, how it makes you sound crazy when you talk about it, like to normal, I say normal people who aren't in the paranormal. It's not the sort of thing you talk about. You know, I talk about things to my muggle friends, and I catch them looking at me as if say, "Oh my God, what the heck?" Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What the heck? And you know,
we all know that.
Exactly. Yeah, we've all had that. You talk about it with people into the paranormal; they're not quite so. They don't look at you in the same way. My muggle friends call me the weird one of the group. I'm Phoebe. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm the weird one of the group because of what I'm into and some of the experiences I've had. Yeah, they love me telling them about it. They think it's great. But...
To be fair, I've met some of your friends and they're just as weird.
No, they're not. They're lovely.
They are. They're weird. None of them like going ghost hunting. What weirdos.
I mean, one of my friends, she lost her husband, and then all of a sudden she was told in a funny kind of way to go and get her breast checked. And then the next day an appointment came through for a mammogram, and she was like, I've not long had one. Do you know what I mean? What's this all about? She actually went to the appointment because she thought, well, okay, fair enough. What with what happened yesterday and then this turning up on my doorstep today, and they found a lump.
Yeah.
Caught it in the nick of time, they said. She thinks it's her dead husband that helped that scenario. She didn't see him. It wasn't an apparition, but the sequence of events that occurred on that, too bizarre to discount as being something that was normal.
Yeah.
She'd not long had a mammogram. you don't have you have a mammogram, what, God, I don't know, every 5 years, I think it is.
Yeah.
So she'd not long had one. For her, it was like, oh, okay, I'll go and have one only because of the occurrence she'd had the day before.
Yeah.
She has no pain in her breast, no, worry in that way. But because of the way it had happened, she was like, no, I'll go and get it checked because it's just a little bit weird. Luckily, she did.
Yeah.
Now she's got no problem. Now she's got that problem solved for her. Minimal treatment as well because they caught it so early. Was that her loved one, her dead husband, coming forward and pushing her to get that checked out again? That's what she believes.
Nice. Yeah.
And to be fair, I'm not going to sit there and say it wasn't because it was weird.
Yeah, that certainly sounds sort of, yeah, well, if that's what...
Divine intervention.
If that's what helps her for it, then, yeah, good on her.
Well, it saved her because they caught it really early. It is just one of those things. We talk about just one of those things in regard to poltergeist activity where things go missing, then they turn up, you can't explain them, you've turned your house upside down. But other things happen that are just one of those things that you go, oh, it's just one of that missed scope call, just one of those things. That apparition that you saw, just one of those things. How many of those do we dismiss because we must have got the timing wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or, whatever. Because of the circumstance that you were under in the World War trenches, we dismiss it because you think, oh, it's my psychological situation that I'm in. I'm under so much stress, it must have been what caused it. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was a ghost.
Yeah.
Maybe it was the spirit of a loved one looking out for you. I think my point here is, we talk quite skeptically at times regarding the paranormal, particularly when we look at ghost investigations or, ghost hunts, when we're out of a weekend doing the thing and, we are quite skeptical of that. But then again, we all have occurrences in other ways that we won't dismiss. And I don't know where the dividing line is and whether there should even be a dividing line. I don't think you should. I think if you're into the paranormal, you should, yes, it's good to debunk. It's good to be critical thinking. It's good to have peer review. It's good to have all of those things. But at the end of the day, a personal experience is a personal experience. Nobody knows apart from you. You lived it. You experienced it. Even someone like me who well researched in regards to paranormal, I can debunk quite a lot of things. I can look at things in a psychological way. I know how my body works to a degree. I'm not a doctor, but I'm not a scientist, but I've got a fair understanding. There are still things that have happened that I can't explain. And there are still things that happen to other everyday people that people can't explain. And if someone comes to you with an occurrence, no matter what circumstance that was under, whether that was a World War I trench or whether that was somebody just making a cup of tea in the kitchen and they have an experience, you can't be so easy to dismiss it. And that, I kind of think, is where I sit with it all. Just because I can't explain it doesn't mean to say it didn't happen or it did happen. You just have to sit there and take it for what it is. It's fascinating. I think a lot of the World War occurrences that we talked about tonight, it's easy. It's the easy opt-out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were under a lot of stress. The conditions were terrifying. You could be so dismissive. And you can back up.
There is so many contributing factors that, for their experience, but you just can't tell exactly what it is.
No. But again, I've always said this about paranormal activity in any shape or form that it comes. It's never going to be the one explanation fits all. I think it's always going to be so many different contributionary factors as to why something happens, and it's never that easy. Even if you've got all the data on all the occurrences in the whole world, it's still not easy to explain. You're not going to be able to explain it. And on that bombshell, that's the end of this show. Have we got any news?
The book Paranormal Concepts Extra is still on sale, available from Amazon for your respective countries. So obviously the American one is .com, isn't it? Mm-hmm. The UK one is co.uk. But yeah, you can still get it worldwide. You
can. And there's another blog going up very shortly, Richard's follow-up blog on our paranormalconcept.com website. So when that gets released, check it out. Don't forget, check us out on the socials. That's Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. We've got lots going on over on those pages. Well, guys, I find it very difficult talking about the wars. I don't know how you two feel.
I'm not that averse, that was always a sort of like a very sort of interest of mine sort of growing up, sort of like, and, actually sort of I had relatives that actually fought in them. So, it's sort of, it's something I've always grown up with. And it sits all right with me. I know it wasn't nice, but, I sort of, it sits okay with me.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. To be fair, it's it's something that interests me. I do love hearing different aspects of the war, but yeah, I just don't know too much about it. So having this research is quite interesting.
I think one thing's for sure: we should never forget what any man that went through on any side, doesn't matter, an individual man fighting for his life in a war situation is something that should never be underestimated. And we have our freedoms today because of these wars, and they shaped the future that we now live in.
Well, as they say on Remembrance Day, we will remember them.
We certainly will. On that note, say good night, guys.
Good night, guys.
Good night, guys.